Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Arab Voice in Games panel. Thanks a lot for all the speakers who were accepted to join. I'm here with some amazing people, so thanks a lot. Right now, we're going to speak about representation, but also share personal experiences within the industry as Arabs. We just wanted to remind you that Arab doesn't necessarily equal being Muslim. That Middle East is a very diverse region with a lot of different people with different profile who have different faith, different religion, and different ethnicities. So please keep that in mind. So I'm Sarah, community developer at Focus on Interactive, and I'm here with some incredibly talented people. If you're okay with it, we're going to start introducing ourselves. Malik, would you be able to go first?
Of course. Thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction. My name is Malik Tafaha. I'm the head of communications and localization over at Ubisoft Middle East. I've been at Ubisoft now for 7 years, and I've worked on helping them launch and maintain their strategy across Arab territories, as well as Iran, Pakistan, and Turkey. I'm really excited to be here. We have a lot to talk about, but I'm gonna give it off to Noha.
Awesome, thank you. My name's Naha Qadi, and like Malak, I also work at Ubisoft. I'm at the Ubisoft Toronto studio in Canada. I'm a narrative designer on Far Cry 6. I've been on this project for over 3 years now, and it'll be releasing in a few months on October 7th. And prior to that, I have a Bachelor of Game Design. So I've studied game design prior to that for 4 years.
Thanks a lot. Sun, would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, what? Of course. I'm Sanem. I'm the studio director and co-founder of Perfect Garbage. We're an indie studio that primarily focuses on bringing Black and brown characters to the forefront of games, specifically in genres like horror and action, things of that like. I'm also a narrative designer at Silver Rain Games for their upcoming unannounced IP as an EA original title, which has been really, really exciting. I have been having a great experience. And yeah, that's who I am. And I'll, of course, give it to Rami.
Thank you. I'm Rami Swain. I'm a Dutch-Egyptian game developer. After all of your introductions, I'm a school dropout that started an indie youth studio that worked out pretty well, and then did that for 10 years. Made a bunch of award-winning indie games, traveled the world for 10 years trying to meet developers everywhere, see what advantages, disadvantages, opportunities, obstacles they face in making games in many places around the world with different situations around the world. And I've spent the last 10 years trying to make the industry more fair.
Thanks a lot. So as you can see, we have a lot of different people from working in different regions. And actually, to start, I think it would be super interesting, Malik, if you could tell us if you noticed a change in the industry since you joined in terms of Arab presence or even voices emerging in the Middle East?
Of course. We've seen a big evolution in the gaming sector in the region over the last decade. In terms of presence, PlayStation and Xbox platforms have, sorry, just a second. I just lost the chain of thought. In terms of presence, platform holders and third-party publishers have had an established proper presence within the region, be it via a local team or a dedicated set within their HQ. Both Xbox and PlayStation platforms have had formal editions of local stores across Xbox Live and PlayStation Network, in addition to the introduction of Arabic text support across both systems. Localization-wise, we've seen a number of games that have gone up from single digits in 2014 to almost triple digits now. I remember when I joined Ubisoft back in 2014, they only had localized 2 games, Assassin's Creed Black Flag and Rayman Legends. And now we're closing in at 28 localized games across 13 franchises, both old and new, one of which is Noha's Far Cry 6. Still, there's a lot of untapped potential with mobile, free-to-play, esports, as the formula constantly changes and evolves, especially as we seek to break down barriers of entry.
That takes a lot. I was wondering, Rami, did you notice a change as well on your side?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an awareness of the existence of Arabs, which honestly is a huge shift from before in a lot of the Western games industry and a lot of the international games industry. And it shows in there's still a lot of stereotyping sort of going on, but there's less of it. The language mistakes get caught more often, but not always. You know, Arabic still is presented right to left sometimes. But most importantly, I think, and it's a little sad that it's the capitalist sort of like version, but I think people have understood that there is a large market in the Arab world in the Middle East, and that for that reason alone, they should probably not anger all of the people over there. I think that generally there's been an increase in awareness. It had, like Malik was saying, you know, we're now at what, almost triple digits, which that's the amount of games that launch in like a day, right? Across globally.
Just to add to that, like almost every single publisher has published at least one game with some level of Arabic support, be it menus, subtitles, or even dubbing, which has been an incredible boost to the gaming sector here in the region, and kind of tapped into an accessibility sector that no one really kind of tapped into before 2014.
Right. The short version is that there's movement, which is hopeful. It's early, it's young, it's not where it needs to be, it's not where the region deserves it to be, but it's definitely on a trajectory that is hopeful.
Yeah, talking about like representation, like in games as product. I think you remember that this year's we had like products such as 6 Days Fallujah, or even like the press event for Sniper Ghost Warrior, you know, who have been perceived as quite damaging in terms of representation, have been criticized by media and prominent voice in social media as well. So I thought it would be super interesting to actually discuss representation itself of Arab character. Son, did you notice like trend or even genres where you feel like we're still lacking in terms of representation of Arab characters?
All the genres. All of the genres. Like I said, I'm a really big believer in introducing, especially people of color. I primarily focus with Arab characters because of who I am, in genres that we wouldn't be the main characters of. So like my dream is, I know cyberpunk just happened, but my dream is to have a cyberpunk game with an Arab main character. My dream is to have a horror game with an Arab main character and things like that. And I have seen this shift in indie sphere. I think it's because a lot of devs who are coming from our cultural backgrounds are making games and are like putting themselves in the forefront of these main characters. But I will be like really honest in that is specifically locked into the indie sphere. I haven't seen it really bleed into AA or AAA from my experience. And also it still isn't fully receptive yet with platforms and publishers. I've learned through indie pitching and things like that, and I don't know if the same experience is the same for you, Rami, but there's like kind of this subtle 3-strike rule when you're pitching a game. What is risky? And apparently brown and black characters as the main characters in some genres are a risk factor. And that, so if you have a few other risks in your game, that might be the tipping point of a no. And so it causes a lot of need to like navigate that space as well, while still sticking really true to bringing the characters that you want to be as the main characters in your game.
Sarah, from my end, I'd like to highlight an important development that we've seen within games, especially AAA products, where we've seen more Arab representation, and not only representation within characters, but representation that is researched well. So within Overwatch, we have Pharah and Ana. Within Rainbow Six Siege, for instance, we have Nomad, Qaid or Qaid. And last but not least, we have Oryx, which was actually co-designed with our team here in Dubai, between us and the Montreal studio that oversees Siege's development. It was really cool to be involved with them, to see them care this much, this meticulously, the power that they gave us over the naming, the research, the history, the background, where they knew that we were the experts, even though no one was Jordanian from the team. Oryx is a character from Jordan. We consulted with our own Jordanian friends. You know, as Arabs, it's very easy to have a plethora of multi-ethnic kind of friends from across all of the region. So we consulted with them. We double-checked everything. We made sure that Oryx was as representative and as respectful as possible when it comes to presenting Arab characters or characters of Muslim or Arab backgrounds within our games.
I think there's a, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to add that it just kind of shows how diverse the Arab world really is. Like when we get consultants, which is highly encouraged when you are getting like putting together an Arab character, even if someone on the team is Arab, like for example, you were saying like the character was Jordanian. You need to get someone from Jordan to actually talk about that culture, because if you get someone that's Egyptian, it's a completely different culture. Even though we speak the same language, it's not the same country. And it's also uniquely diverse. There's so many unique opportunities as well. So definitely getting the right diversity consultants and making sure you get it right is super important.
Right. Even though we speak the same language, the language is highly diverse between the places as well. Like as an Egyptian, if I order lemon and I'm in a different country, I'm going to get yogurt, and I'm going to be very confused as to why I don't get milk. Right. Like because in Egypt we use lemon for milk. So across the region, words, phrases, mannerisms, like words for food, words for all sorts of things might differ, and traditions differ, cultural backgrounds differ, the way people celebrate things differ. Even within countries, obviously, there's a huge diversity between rural and urban areas, between north and south of countries, east and west of countries. So a lot of people think they can get it right by getting Arab representation right, but really, like, Arab representation is just like all of these different forms of representation that we're talking about that are a lot more specific. To speak to Sun's answer a little more, I think that the interesting thing about this whole situation for me right now has been that even though in indie the push is much harder, even though it might sound strange, indie might be as risk averse or more risk averse nowadays than a lot of AAA development is, because there is this middle layer of funding, investment, pitching, stuff like that. Like the sort of dream of indie being this independent space where you can make whatever you want. It's not quite that anymore. There's a definite, like, very severe business consideration, and for small teams that don't have a lot of funding, that don't have a lot to fall back on, especially for people with diverse backgrounds, people of color, people from regions that are underrepresented, the need to make something that will sell or will fund is so high that a lot of people from the region end up setting their game in Seattle or in New York or in, a place that would be recognized internationally. I think AAA actually has a really important part to play here in using the resources that they have to get these things of representation right and to normalize getting these representations right. So there's this weird thing going on where the push is definitely coming from indie, and the sort of like the speaking is coming from indie. But in AAA, that's where a lot of the fight feels like it is right now. And it's sad that indie is in that space, and I really hope that in the future there will be funding from the region that just accepts that we're going to make a game about Arabs, right? We're going to make a game about our cultures. For now, it remains a fight to explain that, no, I really want to make a game about Egyptians, like that. No, I'm serious. No, there's no pyramids. No, we're not. No mummies. No. It's hard. So it's a confusing time in that regard.
Well, one thing I just want to do in terms of like a call out and to platform holders and game distribution companies, in that I wish they also kind of expand their scope when they're looking at indie games to help publish, to include games that are being made locally in the region. This is a topic that constantly comes up when it comes to me interacting with audiences or with friends that are developing games, where they always have an issue in trying to reach out to platform holders or Epic or Steam. There are some efforts being made, but it's not enough. And like one of the games that now pops into my mind, and I kind of want to plug because I'm really excited for it, it's Nightscape, being made by Mizan Studios in collaboration with Astroblade. It's a game that literally celebrates Arab culture and Arab history. It's all about a character called Layla rebuilding the astronomy that was lost because the sun kind of became jealous of the moon. And it celebrates like our own history and culture of relying on the stars to navigate the night sky, because during the day it's too hot. So they've been struggling a bit in terms of reaching out to publishers. And it's just another reminder that I do feel like the region in specific, like let alone MENA-focused or SWANA-focused games and characters are somewhat marginalized on a global scale within the MENA market in itself, it's pretty tough.
I would oppose the word somewhat. They're strongly marginalized.
I'm being a bit diplomatic.
Right.
But,
You're very diplomatic.
Now
I get to be now. There's an advantage to being indie. It's brutal. I help a lot of games in the region with connecting with publishers, and it's remarkable how much harder it is to pitch identical games effectively. One, when you're presenting it as being made by the Arab team that's making it, and then having a partner studio in the US and just using them as the name for the people that are making it. Like I've straight up tested that, and it's a little scary, the difference that makes. Like the questions that you get are different, the risks that people are looking for are different. People don't trust the region, and that when it comes to business, that is it has a huge effect on the opportunities in the region. So there's a lot of work to be done. But a large part of that will come from normalizing our stories, our presence, our voices, and moving away from this idea that gets, perpetuated through games, that we are sandy villages with jeeps with machine guns, and that really there's nothing good in the region besides fights.
Can we just please get rid of that soundtrack, please, please, everyone, just drop
You're not a fan of Desert Rose by Sting?
I am, of course.
Not what it calls you?
It makes me feel very Arab, yes. Thank you for being...
I will never get tired of the dance like an Egyptian thing when people hear that I'm Egyptian. I got really tired of it really quickly, actually, but now I get to be diplomatic.
Talking about like normalizing our story, I was wondering, did you notice any like great like representation inclusion approaches in the last year where you were like, oh, this is great?
I have one, but it's not Arab, but I do connect with it because it's also a Muslim character, which was Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan in the Avengers game. Even though she wasn't Arab, I did connect with her a lot, just culture-wise. And she made jokes about like she was wearing a burkini, and like little things like that just like resonated with me so much because I can relate to that. Like the cultures are not the same, but there was a similarity. And it's kind of unfortunate that I'm giving this example because it's not Arab, but that was close enough for me that I'm like, you know what, this counts for me. I'm just gonna take it. But I do love how they did that character so much in that game. Like they didn't really talk so much about her culture or religion that much. It just focused on her character, how she was like this bubbly, super naive Avenger, like a coming of age story. So I think they did a really good job. I hope one day that there could be an equivalent to that, but with an Arab character.
From my end,
my dream.
Sorry, the example that I can think of is very small, very minor, but again, it shows, as what Noha was saying, like something that small can really leave a big impact. I was watching Mitchells versus the Machines, the new Sony-made movie on Netflix, and in several shots, you can see a hijabi woman in the background. It's a shame that like a character is in the background, but my friends and I, we paused the movie and we looked at each other and we were like, a hijabi character in an animation on Netflix that was backed by Netflix and made by Sony. Like something that minor, and it made my hijabi friends feel seen. I hope to see more hijabi presence within video games and movies that isn't stereotypical or isn't focused on the fact that the character is hijabi. But it was so cool to see that minor fleeting moment that it's repeated several scenes in the movie. It felt really nice. It felt acknowledging.
Right. I don't know. There's a few examples. I honestly think, even though the Call of Duty series frequently gets a lot of things wrong, they've actually had pretty strong Arab representation over some of the later games. Infinite Warfare had a Lebanese character. I think the latest Modern Warfare had a pretty well-rounded character. They're still soldiers. They're still fighting, but at least they're not the bad ones. I recently came across a clip from Uncharted 3 that made me laugh more than anything else, where Ramesses, who is one of the tertiary villains of the game, pulls the bag of Nathan Drake's head and goes, يا صباح الفلافل والحمص والبابا ganoush. And somehow that just, it hit exactly right. It reminded me of my grandma. She would always say sabah al-asal or sabah al-ful, and then just add words on top of it. It's like a way of saying good morning. And it makes no sense, but it was delivered so genuine and so in character of this sort of like theatrical character. It's a shame what they did with the character in the end, but just that one moment, I watched it like 50 times and I was like, huh, sometimes we do get to have like little jokes and little like wings and little things that are ours, even though it's small. That one made me laugh a lot and it still makes me smile.
That video was perfect. That was like, the accent was perfect. Everything about it was perfect. I would not believe it was from a video game. But like the fact that it's just so tiny and we have so much appreciation for just a tiny thing, just one line. We heard one line from a game and immediately we're blowing up about it, you know? So that's like how important this stuff is to us. Like, and we'd like to one day see a main character or like a bigger role for like an Arab character in games. That would be like the high-end dream for us. And it's not a lot to ask for, but like somehow it unfortunately is. So even what Malik was saying with background characters, like animations actually, like a lot of anime shows, even like Hilda, they have background characters of hijabis. And I also I'm like, oh my God, that's the hijabi. And she's like almost in every episode in the background. And it's also just very sad that we get excited over characters with no speaking roles. Like, imagine how we'd react if we had a huge speaking role in a game, you know?
Another thing that I just want to quickly highlight is Assassin's Creed. I mean, it started with an Arab protagonist and like set in Muslim cities in Jerusalem and Damascus. And it was really cool to see, like, to hear the adhan, to hear the chatter in Arabic, although it wasn't entirely correct in that, like, they used a Syrian dialect 1,000 years ago, but it was really cool. And I remember when I was playing Assassin's Creed, my brother and my father would also sit and try to compare notes, like, no, this wasn't there back then, but it's fine. It came into being like 100 years later. Did
you read the book? So the funniest thing about Assassin's Creed to me is it seems that the game team did an incredible job researching a lot of things in the region. So Altair is Altair ibn al-Ahad, son of no one, right?
No one.
They have, in the book, they describe his father as, I don't know what his first name is, but then Ibn al-Ahad. And I'm like, this is either a very unfortunate family or y'all didn't understand how last names work in the Arab world. But it was the funniest thing, like 2 orphanaged people or just somebody that went like, last name, Ibn al-Ahad. Made me laugh a lot. Just incredible.
It wasn't perfect in any way, but it was still kind of really cool to see, like, especially 13, 14 years ago. And the start, like, of a massive franchise that's now played and celebrated by many people. Like the start was via an Arab Muslim character called
I also like Layla in the later ones, right? She's just a very chill, like, Arab person with like a penchant for hacking stuff and going against the rules, and she's just trying to do the right thing. And the frustrating thing is, I don't mind there being bad Arabs in video games. Like, I really don't have a problem with that because there are bad Arabs in the real world. I would just also like other Arabs in our, just anything else. Like, I would like spooky Arabs. I would like happy Arabs. I would like silly Arabs. I would like funny Arabs. I would like overly serious Arabs. I would like unlikable Arabs. I would like all those things. I would really like to stop with the like Allahu Akbar and shoot people Arabs because we've, we've done yeah. Those are copy pasted a lot, and I think we need to update the standard Unity asset that all of these games are using.
I'm wondering, do you think like this lack of representation has like a direct impact on your own like creative work? Do you feel it, like you try to push it for it way more, or you, as you said, like maybe in doing the word you're like, it's better if I avoid it right now and maybe later. Does it has any impact on how you approach your work?
Do you mind if I jump in like first?
Yeah.
I have so much to say on this topic. I spent a lot of my career writing as a white man, like unapologetically. The main characters of my story were white men. I read a lot of, I studied a lot of literature, and a lot of literature is told from that lens. And that's like the writing style I learned. And I always joke secretly, I'm just a white man because of how I write from those influences. And it took me a long time to start shifting my my Arabic characters, shifting my characters into having more Arab representation, what that reflected me in my, like, where I grew up. And of course, I grew up in America, hence the howdy Midwestern accent. I grew up with my family completely isolated from my culture back in Algeria. They were beer hair themselves. I only see my grandparents once a year, tops, even less. So I had to assimilate quick when I was here. And so now I've like grown into this space where I feel a lot more confident in having characters. And I actually think I would really want to harp on kind of what Rami mentioned, whereas if we had this range, I think a lot of Arab devs would feel comfortable making Arab characters because suddenly they don't become the beacon of like, what is good rep? And that used to be my biggest fear. And you can't do that if you like writing horror. You can't just sit and be like, this is a great character from start to finish. So I definitely think that the lack of representation has really impacted how I handle my own characters and how I approach the medium. Yeah, I'll like pass it around because I know I can like talk for hours on this subject.
The beacon thing is spot on, right? Like if you are, I've been sort of like visibly Arab in the indie space for like 10 years. And that was hard because there was nobody else to point at for a very long time. And I think for a long time, I tried to hide it as much as possible. And the main things that came through were the more Muslim aspects of it. I don't drink, which is not very well respected in the games industry. I would do Ramadan during E3, which there is no like form of help for something like that. So those things kind of like shine through. But the Arab part was always scary to me because it will be the only or one of the only examples, which would mean that everybody's expectations for it would be unreasonably high, right? Because you would hope that something like that represent everything. And I remember I mentioned Layla from Assassin's Creed. I remember playing her, and I think she's half Western, half Egyptian, witty, computer focused, hacker, likes to get in trouble. She's me. And somehow I still felt like slightly annoyed that she was she, because it was so close to representing me. And then somehow it had a visceral response, right? I had a response like, oh, so close to seeing a character that is just exactly as I am in a video game. And it took me like a few hours to like go like, no, this is great, right? If not for me, there are millions and millions of people who need this representation right now. But it's really funny how when something gets that close to being personal, that close to being right, that close to being you, it hurts more when it's not, right? And because there's so few examples, it's not like I can go like, well, at least I've got this other character, right? And I think this is something that a lot of people that are more represented tend to forget, especially, like for white people. It's like, well, then just know, what's the problem? Like, it's like, no, this is the only time I've ever felt this way. This is the only time I've ever felt like, oh, this is so close. Oh my God. And it's never happened since. It's not happened before. It's not happened since. So the worry of making a character like that, you try to think like, oh, will I anger the Jordanians? I'll anger the Algerians? Will I anger the Muslims? Will I anger the Christians? Will I anger?
For sure, the Algerians.
Right,
we don't want it.
Just do not anger.
Don't try it.
Right. It becomes suffocating, right? If you're trying to do proper representation in a space that has no other examples of it, you're the beacon. The Sun used the perfect word. For me, in my work, it hasn't shined through. And I think like Sun, I took a very similar approach. I needed to be in a place where I had enough influence, enough power, enough survivability in the industry to start speaking up about things. And it's taken me 10 years, and I'm still not sure if I'm at the spot where I can speak about these things. And it's terrifying to speak about these things because you worry that if you get it wrong, you're also representing a lot of people poorly, right? So there's so much that you're continuously juggling if you're underrepresented or marginalized before you get to the point of how do I tell my own story, that just getting to the place where you can tell your own story safely is, well, in my case, it was a 10-year career, and I'm still not sure I'm there. I'm happy to see these big companies tackle it, because, you know, I still haven't been able to. I hope for future projects I'll make it a goal.
One element I want to also highlight is the fact that because of the stereotypical representation of Arabs and Muslims within the media that most of the West and white people consume, I feel like a lot of the times Islam as a religion and Islam as a culture are being blurred together, where if you try to present the culture, they misunderstand it as religion, and they freak out and they say, no, this will cause a backlash. We're not going to do that. And the biggest reference I can give is Ramadan, for instance, where Ramadan in itself is a religious month, but also is a very cultural phenomenon for all Muslims and Arabs. It's a time for celebration, family gathering, friends, gifting, respecting the elders, getting financial compensation from your elders. We all love the Eid, of course. But I mean, like, I would love to see, and Rami did like a small iftar thing in Animal Crossing last year that kind of sent ripples. I remember Overwatch added a few elements. Call of Duty, PUBG have all been kind of celebrating Ramadan in a way that is very like vindicating of our feeling of saying, like, yes, this is a celebration. This is something that should be celebrated, that is celebrated by a fifth of the world population in the end. 1.5 billion people are Muslim across this blue planet. So I hope that people in the West can see the lines, how you can still cover the culture without needing to be religious or needing to be super respectful of the religion. There are two very distinct elements within every religion. It's like Christmas, Thanksgiving, Chinese Lunar New Year, excuse me. These are all elements that have become cultural despite their religious backgrounds. And I hope to see Ramadan and other Eid festivities within Islam become kind of a norm to be celebrated not only within games, but to be shed light more within movies and other forms of entertainment.
What will be our Die Hard, where people argue whether it's a Ramadan movie or not? Why don't we get to have that discussion? Everybody gets to have a discussion about why Die Hard is Die Hard a Christmas movie? We don't get to argue.
Lord of the Rings is a solid Ramadan trilogy. Really takes the whole holiday.
Oh, that's true.
Fair enough. But yeah, the Ramadan iftar, actually, the Animal Crossing iftars I did were actually because there was no representation for it in Animal Crossing, and it was the saddest thing because it's the perfect game for it. Like, you can just have Moon Month where the moon is somehow important and your characters come together to have food, and I'm like, why? I know why, but why? So I just did it myself, which turned out to be really easy, which made me more frustrated that it didn't exist yet. It's things like that. I've been lobbying with a lot of companies lately to just include Ramadan in there, or Eid at least in there. And Google has this amazing document explaining the commercial opportunities of Ramadan, which is the grossest Google document that I've ever touched in my life. But it's also true.
I would like that document, though.
I'll send it to you. But it's the kind of thing where you just look at it, and these are usually files from like Indonesia or somewhere in the Far East. But they apply equally to the Arab world, right? And I think in many ways, a lot of people just don't understand that there is that disconnection, that religion, culture, they overlap, they intertwine. And people act like that's not true in the West. Why is Sunday our weekend? Like, come on, of course it's the same in the West, right? Like, of course that's how it works. Like, every culture is integrated with its faiths, with its beliefs, with its ideologies, and there's no difference there. There's just this weird belief that is unique to the Arab world, and it just isn't.
Just to throw in something, I just wanted to point out that even in our cultures, we blend so well with other cultures too. I do a lot of like comic work and things like that on the other mediums. And one of my favorite projects that I do is called Bone Marrow. And I work really closely with my friend who's Chinese, and our mythologies get really close and our cultural beliefs get really close, taking off our shoes, how we drink our tea, things like that. And so there's so much like beauty that you can have if we opened up that kind of respect to the culture and like brought it into other spaces that works well with other marginalized cultures. Like we're not here standing up saying like only Muslims need to really be at the forefront. We need to get to the top. We need to be the new white man. Like we're not asking for that, but even like integrating ourselves and talking with other cultures and bringing kind of these cultures to the forefront, I think does incredible things.
Right. I've been really surprised. I do this new podcast now called the Habibis, and it's an Arab game developers talking about life and Arab culture. And one of the things we notice is we have listeners around the world, and the thing that I've noticed is that maybe Western culture is the exception to the world, not the standard. Most cultures take off their shoes before they enter a house, and they have Latin America and Asia at large have very similar food traditions to the Arab world, and very similar approaches to like politeness and family, and like the value of family, the value of friends. And then you get to the Netherlands, and then you're like, that's not how it works here. It's like it's very odd that there's sort of like the culture, and then there's like the West, and somehow we've been convinced that the West is the standard and everybody else is different. Well, it's been a little shocking, I will say, doing that podcast, and because I never talked about my culture much in public, and now that I am, and I have this international audience from all around the world, it's just really baffling to talk about Captain Majid, the television show, and realize that people in Latin America have watched it, and that across Asia it had a following as well, and then nobody in the West has ever heard of it, and I'm just like, wait, so who's the default now? I don't get it anymore. Confusing stuff. Very exciting.
I will say, like, even like with the Discord channel, like everyone reacts to your episodes and shares their stories as well, which is amazing. Like, I remember when I was on it, we talked about Doily on the PlayStation, and everyone like related to that, not just the Arab world. Like everyone, like that's a thing the West has no idea what it's about. But I will say, like, Rami, like I appreciate so much that you started this podcast, because I think it just started like this little boom of like diversity in Arabs and like the social media and the community. Like we've been reaching out to so many more people and folks because of this podcast. Like beforehand, like whenever I like run into someone, it was like a miracle. It was amazing. But here now it's so easy. It's so easy to find people like us. And I like thank you so much for making this. Like we love tuning in and talking to the community. It's amazing what you've created.
You're gonna make me cry. It's been.
I have to say that I feel like being locked down brought us all closer together over the last year and a half. Because before we used to use GDC, E3, Gamescom as means to get to know one another, but we tend to be very busy. I remember several call-outs last year on Twitter that were started like, "Hey, Mena folks, Swana folks, tag yourself here, tag your friends, tag people you know," and like the circle has boomed massively over the last year, and it's been really cool to see and connect and talk. Like I've had friends from competing publishers talk to me about their efforts within their companies. We've learned from one another. We've shared findings, and because in the end, even though we're competing on the public sphere, and like we're adding to the representation and the focus of bringing in these people of color, these people that have been marginalized for so long, and it's been really cool to see.
I just want to add to that too, that it's spread tons of communities too. Like I think coming up now, I think it's the 18th, so don't take my word on it. There's a whole art tag called Art Mubarak, where it's just a lot of artists who are in these spaces are actively putting out their work. And it's done incredibly well when the first time it released around Eid. And it's really exciting. I say, like, if I guess to harp on like the earlier comments that we had about like, where are we in this space? It's cool to see that at least we're connecting with one another and we're trying to create our own spaces together. I think that's more important oftentimes than getting acceptance from a wider audience.
Right. Yeah, we are in this space. Like we have always been in this space. The amount of Arabs that I've met over the past year or two that have been in games for decades, they just haven't, like Sun, like me, they've presented as a white person because that's easier. Now they're kind of like stepping forward and reclaiming their sort of Arab identity. I don't know what's changing that, but I know it's necessary. Any good community, any opportunity to improve things will come from our combined efforts, not from the efforts of any individual. And in that regard, it's so important that we get to know each other, that we get to, the thing I hate is, like, I'm on Twitter, I have this audience, and I have an Arab joke, like a joke that Arabs would get. And you just sit there and you're like, do I tweet this? And 2 years ago, I would have said no. Yeah. Two years ago, I would have said no. I would have said, because nobody will get it, and it'll get like 4 retweets, and it'll be quiet and nobody will care. And now I'm like, doesn't matter what everybody else thinks. Like, it's important that people know that our culture is here, right? Our people are here. We are represented. And I put my name in Arabic in my Twitter handle, right? And it was a tiny gesture, but I think it's an important gesture. And now I put my name in Arabic everywhere. And, it's just to let people know, people in the region, people across the world with Arab heritage, people across the world that are interested in Arab culture. We are here. Like, it's not like we're outside the games industry fighting to get in. We're inside the games industry fighting to get, equal opportunity.
More money.
Right. Just give us money. That's yeah.
And I kind of want to just give a shout out to Alana, especially for the work they did with Itch for the Palestinian bundle. That in itself was mind blowing. I'm originally Palestinian. I'm Lebanese on paper, but my grandfather is from Palestine. And it just broke me down in tears to see the level of support that we managed to gather from the gaming community. Like especially the indie scene, and then in the end to almost get $1 million worth of support for the Palestinian relief aid was just mind-blowing. And that's also another example as to how the community now is much more aware of the presence of Arabs and their agony and their anguish, and ready to rally behind a common cause that is humanitarian in nature, not political in any way.
The organization that we fundraised for emailed us later that they had a separate fundraiser, like an official fundraiser, and they raised an additional $1 million there. But that indie games raised as much as a professional full fundraiser organized by it was incredible. Like that was $2 million total to the Palestinian people. What a great thing. Go video games.
Yeah.
Indeed.
I think I just want to finish our panel. I would love you to tell me if you think there's what are the most impactful way you think the industry could improve, in terms of like inclusivity, but also just understanding of the culture, of the identity itself.
Money. Give me your money.
Yep.
I'm only speaking from the indie sphere, and I know that Rami, of course, can definitely talk about it too. But if there's just a bigger funding, it's like Rami said, there's this kind of middle risk factor that we always have to maintain. If you're hitting $500,000 to $1 million and you're an indie game, you have to have so many things backing you, and that's just the industry in itself. But if you're Arab or you're other minority, that becomes the heaviest weight to get through the door. And without that kind of money, you can't have teams, you can't support a growing studio. You really, really need to find ways to get funding sources. And the diversity inclusion funds, which are great, are capped all the time. So they never actually fund, if you're paying everyone, my eyes narrow, if you're paying everyone correctly, they never actually fund full game development just with diversity funds. You always have to, you got to start thinking about venture, you have to do the whole biz dev part. Right. And so I really think that at least pouring money into these initiatives, actually pouring money into these initiatives, it's a great start.
Right. I think money.
Sorry, Rami, go ahead.
Money listening to
I'm sorry. I just think we're going to stop here. But okay. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Of course.
It ends on such a harsh note.
I'm sorry.
No worries. It's been a pleasure, and we should really do this more often.
We should.
We have a lot to talk
Thank you very
about,
much.
So much more. Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you, everyone. Thanks, Sarah.
Salam.
Salam.
Shukran.